Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's third edition, midweek edition, perhaps I should say, of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight,
I, Mr. Dube, swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa and will obey, respect, and uphold the Constitution.
KwaZulu-Natal has a new premier. The province's first female provincial government leader is my first guest. She's on standby. We also speak to two of the country's top university vice-chancellors. The Watchdog starts now. KwaZulu-Natal has a new premier, a historic moment for the province, which has never had a female leader at the helm. Since 1994, the province has had 8 premiers, with the IFP holding 2 of the first positions of premier. Nomusa Dube will be the 6th premier under the ANC. She was sworn in at a special sitting of the KwaZulu-Natal legislature in Mooi River in the Midlands.
A monumental moment during the month of women. Members of parliament from the governing party rejoiced in song, singing, Phakama Nomusa Dube, ixesha lifikile. Translated, take your place, Nomusa, your time is now. The DA fielded their own candidate, Mabato Tembe, but she only garnered 11 votes. Nomusa Dube received 45 votes, with 22 abstaining, mainly from the IFP and EFF, while 2 members were absent. The ANC says her appointment marks a new beginning for the province.
We are grateful for all parties that voted with the ANC. Others voted openly, others voted in silence, which is good. We really don't take their support for granted. We will continue to work with all parties going forward in the leadership of KwaZulu-Natal and changing the life of the people of KwaZulu-Natal.
Opposition parties have welcomed Dube Ngube's appointment.
We congratulate her on that election, and we just trust that she will start dealing with economic transformation and building a stable economy, and also ensuring that we create jobs so that we can deal with the scourge of inequality in our province.
The people of KwaZulu-Natal for now have given the ANC the majority. In 2024, when they give the IFP the majority, it is when we will confirm through the voting process a new premier of this province from the IFP caucus. That is why we did not participate today. But we welcome the new premier. As I said in my message, we will hold her accountable together with her executive.
The EFF, however, did not mince their words, calling her out for the misappropriation of funds when she was the MEC for Kochta.
Government should find it in her heart to explain to us, which 250 million were so means for drought money that disappeared under her watch. What happened?
The newly elected premier vowed to work with other political parties. She also addressed and rubbished the allegations levelled by the EFF.
The Premier will continue with the efforts embedded on it in the responsibility for clean and caring government. We want the government employees to project the values of Batopili, and we will live by that. We'll also ensure transparency, accountability, and good governance in all spheres of government. I also wish to say, honourable members, that to Honourable Khoza, there has never been any disappearance of 250 million. If that was the case, the AG, all the reports would have said so.
Meanwhile, former Newcastle mayor, who is also the ANC's treasurer in KZN, Dr. Ntotuko Mahlaba, was sworn in as a new member of the provincial government legislature. The MEC for Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs, Ravi Pillay, tendered his resignation. a cabinet reshuffle is on the cards. Jade Paulser, SABC News, Moy River in the Midlands.
Premier Nomusa Dube-Ncube joins us on the line. Good evening, Premier. Thank you very much for your time, and I suppose congratulations are in order.
Thank you, viewer. Good evening to you, and good evening to all the viewers at home.
Well, among the first things you said was that you're going to work with the opposition in the interests of the people of that province. From what the DA had to say, for them to work with you, you'll have to stop the rhetoric around economic transformation.
I agree, Vuyo, that we've got to start implementing the programs that would lead towards economic growth, but also ensure that the spatial equity is achieved in our province. We are going to be working in earnest, for instance, in implementing programs such as the one that we have that talks to women benefiting 30% in the procurement, the youth, benefiting 20%, and the people with disabilities as well. We do believe that we do have a competitive advantage as a province, and we've got to work on those programs, such as the one that talks to tourism, the one that talks to agriculture, the oceans economy, but also the township and rural economy. Because it is true, Vuyo, that many researchers have shown that jobs are not going to be created by big companies. They are going to be created by small and medium enterprises. They're going to be created through supporting small businesses to be able to employ more people, financial support, skills support, infrastructure support. Without proper infrastructure such as water, electricity, good roads, we are not going to see any economic development or viable economies in our province.
Why has that not happened under the previous 5 premiers of that the ANC has had?
It did happen, Vuyo, except that with the COVID that came and ravaged a number of jobs in our province, and as well as the July unrest that also came, the floods that also battled our province, we've really seen a lot of jobs, a lot of businesses, closing down, battling to be retained. So what we've put in place now that I'm going to be working on, continuing from where my colleague, the previous premier left off, is to ensure that business retention strategies that we had, which means that those businesses that are there have got to be supported to ensure that they expand, to ensure that they operate in an environment where there is proper infrastructure. The other one, as I said, is the support to the SMME. Yes, it has happened, but to a large extent, we have a huge scope to cover. And I'm going to be ensuring that we really focus our budgets towards that economic growth and that support to the SMMEs.
But I mean, COVID, the July unrest, all those things came on the back of a very bad economic situation throughout our country, and KZN was no exception. So what would make you and the rest of your cabinet think that you're going to do it differently this time around, and why did that not happen previously?
Well, what we think we're going to be doing differently, Vuyo, is that we are not very strong in evaluating and monitoring the way we are doing business as government. I do believe that we need to emphasize the point of ensuring that the government is effective. When we do or when we implement projects, those projects have got to be sustainable. We cannot build infrastructure today and within 2 months that infrastructure is gone or it needs to be repaired. We need to also ensure that we hold contractors accountable, but also, ensure that there are systems in place for efficiency. I do believe, that there is a huge scope of government to, spend efficiently than the way that we are doing things at the moment. And I think that's what I'm bringing in. Of course, I'm saying that's not a new policy. We're working on the policies of the ruling party, but I think there has to be emphasis on those areas if we are to achieve, better economic growth and stability in our province.
Well, a man you're going to be relying on for, economic development, ensuring that you're empowering township businesses and this transformation and so on, is your own chairperson. I caught up with him a week ago at that ANC policy conference at Nasdaq, and here's what he said was basically the problem in KwaZulu-Natal. Take a listen.
3 spheres of government, in some instances we work in, or they work in silos. So the district model was trying to address that, the equilibrium. So that we reach the equilibrium, just ensure what is planned at the level of national must be implemented provincial, must be implemented in the 3rd sphere of government, the local government. So I think the issue of corruption is something that is bigger than the mere money that is allocated in the local government. The system, the judicial system must play the role. NPA as well, whenever there is a crime that has been committed, combat that crime by ensuring that you follow the process. Justice delays, justice denied. Just ensure that you arrest those officials who are corrupt, but just go beyond that. Also arrest the business who are also coercing the administration to do in that process, because that's where we don't do. We always say that capitalism is inherent with corruption. Deal with that as well at a bigger scale so that you address the corruption to the T.
Well, he talks about the 3 spheres of government working in silos. And incidentally, you were the minister responsible for local government in your previous role. He also talks about corruption, and as we would have heard from that insert that set the scene for this interview, you had the EFF continuing with the allegations that you had misappropriated funds, to which, of course, you did reply. Just your thoughts on the back of what your MEC, your currently your chairperson of the ANC had to say.
Yes, Vuyo, first of all, maybe let me also emphasize that it's very mischievous of the EFF what they are saying, because honestly, there has never been any money that disappeared in the department. And in fact, if there was anything that would have been, investigated, would have been in the line function. For instance, here, Department of Agriculture that received monies for drought at that time, I would have been the one that were responsible for those monies, because monies go directly to the line function. So that is why I also emphasize that there would have been the first point of call would have been an Auditor General. The second point of call would have been police and everything else if there were any money. I mean, that's a huge amount of money to just disappear. That's why I said it's very mischievous of them to say that, because there's never been anything like that. But talking about the alignment, it is very true that we've got to tighten the alignment of government. At the national level, there are services that are delivered at the national level. Earlier on, I was talking to the communities and about the other people who are saying, look, we've got taps, but we've never had water. Now, the problem there would have been that either there is no bulk, which means there is no dam that must supply, that must take the pipes, and then the reticulation should then be done at the local level. So that alignment, again, needs to be tightened up because we cannot afford to waste money to have, as people said, we've got taps, but there's no water. So there has to be an alignment between national government, provincial government, and local government. And again, as my chairperson was saying, that the departments have got to start really realizing that if we are to be effective as government, we need to work together. There can't be working as if we are competing with one another, as if people want to outshine one another. Because, if you are to build houses, you need roads, you need electricity, you need water. And that means that not just one department, it means a couple of departments must make sure that those budgets and those programs and projects are aligned if we are to deliver effectively and efficiently. Yes, it has happened to a certain extent, but I do believe that, over years, we've tended to slow down or take it for granted that there has to be their alignment. At the local level, there is what is called the IDP. And the IDP should not just be a shopping list, but it should be what the communities in those areas said needs to be delivered.
Okay.
And from the IDP, there has to be province and there has to be national government.
Now, to deliver, on those promises, you need all the power and authority that a premier should have. But no one seems to think that you will have that power and authority precisely because you were a compromise candidate. There's going to be two centers of power in that provincial cabinet. While you have the title of premier, the de facto premier will be your provincial chairperson. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say that it's not true because when we get to be given responsibility at government level, each one of us would have a responsibility and will be expected to deliver on those responsibilities, and we will be measured. Our outcomes will be measured accordingly. So the chairperson, for instance, is also a member of the legislature, and he's got his own responsibilities that even himself has got to be held accountable for delivering on those expectations. So with us, as a governing party, I think it's important as well to realize that for me, I think it's even better that you would have a chairperson who is a political chairperson running the political program and doing all those things. But also you'll have an administration that must focus on the administration and focus on the policies and the implementation of the policies that the governing party says should be implemented without any distraction or without any, other added work that you are supposed to do if you were, for instance, to be a chairperson. But I also do believe that, with my expertise and my experience in government, I really, stand an advantage in terms of understanding the overall functioning of government, but also to be able to even assist my colleagues to ensure that the machinery that we're going to be putting in place does deliver to the expectations.
Do you agree with those that say you are a compromise candidate, and when eventually you do reshuffle the cabinet, do you believe that you will have the authority and freedom to appoint whoever you want to appoint wherever you may want to appoint them, as it is the prerogative of a premier in the province to appoint people to cabinet?
I believe so, Vuyo, because we're working very closely with the leadership in the ANC. I myself sit in the provincial working committee of the ANC that meets weekly, and we are interacting with the whole of the leadership at that level as well. But also, I mean, the fact that I'm not the chairperson does not mean that I'm out of the structure. I'm in the, as I say, that, I was voted for by the people to be, in the executive, in the working committee of the organization. And I do believe that for me, it really is much better that if I was to be given such a huge responsibility, I'm able to focus on government, and I'm able to really be held accountable for doing what I'm given the responsibility to do, without really, as I said, having to, go again and deal with the political structures and deal with other matters within the organization. As I said, we are interacting on the daily basis with the rest of the leadership of the ANC, but also there's no new policies that anyone can implement. We all are implementing the policies that the ANC has put there in terms of the National Development Plan, the provincial growth and development plans. Those are the programs, as well as ensuring that we address the inequalities, but also the economic, challenges of unequal, distribution of the economy and of wealth in our province.
Premier Dube, let's thank you for your time, and we wish you the best of luck in your new job.
Thanks to your listeners and your viewers. I'm sure we are going to be interacting with all the areas that we're talking about. Thank you very much.
We'll be here. We'll be watching. After the break, we celebrate the pioneering work of 3 of our distinguished university principals. UCT's Professor Mamkheti Phakeng and Wits' Zebulon Vilakazi are my guests this evening. The world couldn't help but notice, and tonight we pay tribute to 3 of our country's distinguished academic leaders. With me in studio is Professor Zebulon Vilakazi, the Vice-Chancellor of Wits University, who has been inducted as a Fellow of the Royal Society, the oldest scientific academy in continuous existence in the world. Among the Royal Society's past luminaries are your Isaac Newtons, Charles Darwins, Albert Einsteins, several Nobel Prize winners, and of course, our own Philip Tobias. UCT Vice-Chancellor Professor Mamkheti Phakeng has been elected chair of the International Alliance of Research Universities. This shortly after being named the most influential woman academic in Africa, months after becoming the University of Bristol's first Bristol Illustrious Visiting Professor, recognized by one of the UK's top universities for being an inspirational figure in maths education and university leadership in South Africa. The University of Cape Town's Vice-Chancellor joins us on the line from Cape Town. Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, currently Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Johannesburg, will from the 1st of March 2023 assume a new role of Rector of the United Nations University in Tokyo, Japan. The 3 universities are the top 4 universities in Africa. I'm talking here about Wits, UJ, and UCT. Unfortunately, however, Professor Marwala couldn't form part of tonight's conversation because of changed travel commitments following his new appointment, but we're going to honor him nevertheless. Let me now speak to our guest, Prof. Vilakazi. If I may start with you, for us, the uninitiated, what exactly is this body that boasts of these alumni, who have shaped the world in so many different ways? What is it about exactly?
The Royal Society, of course, is not about royalty. I'm not a member of any royalty. But it's a body that was established in 1616 for the advancement of natural knowledge. And as you mentioned earlier, some of the leading lights in the era were Isaac Newton, Stephen Hawking, Charles Darwin, Dorothy Hodgkins, of course, after whom the Hodgkins is named, and many others. In South Africa, you've had the likes of Sir Aaron Klug, who was a graduate of Wits, Sidney Brenner, and Philip Tobias. And at the University of Cape Town, you also have Professor George Ellis, who's a professor of mathematics there. So obviously there are 7 of us also in South Africa, and Professor Karim Abdul Karim from UKZN.
What exactly does this society do? Well, you sit around the table once in a while to talk about the world, and what exactly do you do?
It's a learned society of all leading scientists across the world, and people who have shown leadership in various aspects of their scientific career. And it is largely about addressing some of the key questions they get asked by get commissioned by various governments on things like climate change, for example, thinking about future challenges that the world will have to contend with, the potential of new other pandemics that we haven't yet come to face. So it actually is largely an organization that publishes manuscripts in fundamental science, in applied science, in health science, and so on and so forth. It is just a group of scholars who, when time arises, will provide what we call evidence-based advice to whatever body is interested in taking the advice.
Professor Phakeng, talk to us about the International Alliance of Research Universities.
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me. So the International Alliance of Research Universities is an alliance of 11 universities in the world. These are leading universities, we keep it small as 11. We were invited a few years ago to join, and the universities include Australian National University, ETH Zurich, National University of Singapore, Peking University, University of California, Berkeley, Cambridge University, Oxford, Yale, University of Tokyo, and University of Copenhagen, and UCT. We are the only university, of course, on the African continent that belong to AYARU. And it's an alliance of leading research-intensive universities in the world that we come together to share ideas, to network and share ideas on what it means, what it takes to run a leading research university, what kinds of support systems are needed. So as a result, in this alliance, we have different working groups focusing on different issues, either like properties and services, alumni, ICT, environmental stability, and so on and so on. But we really, the big issue about AYARU is the fact that we recognize that higher education has a critical role to play in the world. And so it is leading universities that can come together and, in fact, we discuss what are the issues in higher education, share ideas, and go back to our countries and be that voice of a leading university that can give direction in terms of higher education. So it is a meeting of peers, basically, in different areas. So besides vice chancellors meeting, coming together in the president's group, we've got, as I said, different departments in our universities get together. For example, the executive director of libraries at UCT is a member of the working group focusing on libraries, and they share ideas on what kind of developments are taking place in libraries and what kind of a library can support a leading research-intensive university. So it's that. And then, of course, there's other groups that are focusing on research areas that concern all of us in the Alliance.
Of course, I mean, the purpose of tonight's conversation really was one to, acknowledge, what the world has come to recognize in all of you, but also to just get your reflections, as vice chancellors of, the country's leading institutions. You are, all three of you, including UJ, in the top 4 universities on the continent. And you will have seen from how South Africans, embraced and were so proud of you having been roped in by these world bodies. But in the times that we're living, where people often have few things to celebrate or don't think, only yesterday we're having conversation here about Women's Day, and all my guests were feeling that, there is really not much, to celebrate as far as women are concerned. And I'd like you to reflect on the state of higher education in our country for you. And to kick off, because Professor Marwala is not there, I read a piece he penned a few days ago where he talks about, our country's fractured history, which he says was no place for inclusion. And I'm asking this on the back of course, Women's Day, which was commemorated yesterday, the gender-based violence that we're seeing throughout our country, and just your reflections on what universities can actually do, or what part can universities play, Professor Vilakazi, in dealing with this scourge.
Education, we are places of education. We need to ensure, and I did say this in various platforms at the university, that it starts with college dorms, our residence areas, that we need to upend all these, what I would call macho habits that have characterized, the kind of training or education of men in the old days. So we need to, and I did say this to some of the student leaders last year, that you need to educate men of the 21st century, men who will be, who see women and other members of other genders as peers. And we need to convert races from toxic masculine spaces to spaces of innovation, of creativity. And I do believe that our races, instead of producing people who sometimes do become, not all, a very small minority, do become scourge society, but to actually lead unicorns, to be great composers, be great athletes, be great artists. That's what the university is all about, and actually respect others as well. Respect members of other genders and themselves and the environment, and and of course the planet that we inhabit. We have, as a human species, over the last 200 years of industrialization, have wreaked havoc on the planet, and is showing great signs of fragility. So therefore, it is about respect not only for the other person, but the environment and the space you inhabit. What is the role of university in that regard? It is to educate. Of course, where appropriate corrective actions are needed in case of harassment, we will take those actions, but you must actually upfront that with proper educational processes in changing the institutional culture to reflect the values that are spoken about, and become beacons of society. I think, if I can be slightly immodest here, with the three of us here that you've kindly introduced, and you've been very kind and generous in your introduction, we have, judging from the feedback I get from fellow South Africans, in a way, if I can put it that way, have lifted the cross by the gaze of a country that is going through difficult issues. So it's not about one as an individual, but it's the institution you represent, and how can these institutions become big beacons of what society has to be.
Professor Pageng, from where you sit?
I agree with the suggestions that Zeblon has put on the table, but I want to extend them in this way. It is one thing to talk about toxic masculinity when it comes to gender-based violence as is reported in the media. But there's gender-based violence that happens in the boardroom. And it's about time we talk about that gender-based violence. Because without that, what we're doing is just talk, actually. It's about time that we, all of us who are in the boardroom, talk about the gender-based violence challenge it, eradicate it. And I can tell you that gender-based violence is huge in the boardroom. I can tell you as a woman vice chancellor, and I'm using the metaphorical boardroom, that as a woman vice chancellor of a leading university on the African continent, I sit in amazement sometimes looking at what men are acknowledged for in this country, and that women in the same position can do way more, and they will not be acknowledged in the same way. In fact, you can get into a situation where the country ululates, praises, and dances around for a number 2 because they just don't want to recognize number 1, and they would say number 1 is failing. I often think, what would happen if the VC of VETS was a black woman? There would have been an uproar. I'm glad that there's no uproar because VETS is my university. I'm in uproar in terms of the ranking, the QS rankings that came out. I'm glad there's no uproar because I'm a Betty. But I know that if it were a black African woman vice chancellor, it would have been different. And this is the thing about toxic masculinity. And to deal with toxic masculinity, we need the men to stand up. As Zebulon has said, stand up, actually not only become good men, but call it out. We say that to students. And I'm saying men in boardrooms also need to stand up, call it out, and live it differently. Because when you're a woman in leadership, your journey is different. You are held to a different standard. The scrutiny is excruciating. And even when you go through it and win, you still don't get the credit. Why? Because you're the black woman, both the solution and the problem. So you're not supposed to succeed. Because if you succeeded, then you're messing up the formula. You're not supposed to succeed. And I think that's the toxic masculinity that in fact we've got to bring out into the open. Because it is not only in the dormitories, the toxic masculinity. It's in meetings where women are few, or you're the only woman, or you're the only woman with certain accolades that in fact get silenced until a man gets them. And I'm sorry I've got to do that because it is not enough to appoint women in positions of power and make ourselves feel good as a country. It's about time we ask what it takes to make sure that they succeed. What it takes to support a black woman.
What's missing, Prof. Farmers? What's missing? Because, I mean, we have spent the past 20 years or so talking about the transformation of higher education institutions, whether, I mean, we're talking about gender, race, class, you know, that has been, it's supposed to have been the focus. So what's missing?
What's missing is that we're focusing on getting people into the position and not putting the effort to support them. Sort of, you put people there and then you shoot them down to see whether they can stand the bullets, and many don't. That's what I'm saying. Okay. It is not enough to appoint them. You got to ask how to support them. And I've talked about being between the picket line and the boardroom. And that's the black woman. It's not only in this country, it's all over the world. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, it's got to be, black men have to be the first to stand up for a change. Stand with and for black women. And maybe only then we can change things.
Professor Vilakazi, I mean, what has been your lived experience, or even maybe what have you observed, seen in this journey of the past 20 or so years of, you know, transformation, in particular of higher education institutions?
Maybe I'll start first with my personal experience as well. I mean, you mentioned the lived experience. When I went to Geneva CERN, which is this laboratory, obviously it's a cutting-edge laboratory in the world. Basically, we are working on what is the biggest project since the Apollo landing. I mean, biggest global project. I think there were only 2 Africans at the time when I was there. Of course, the number has increased now. And I remember, it's a short story I'll tell you. We just finished our shift. We went across the other side of the lab to buy some refreshments. And it was myself, an Italian guy, a Russian, and an American. So this proprietor just asked us, who we were, the American, whatever. And then he asked me, and you? And I said, I'm Zebulon, and where are you from? I said, I'm from South Africa. And then he asked in French, are you African? Yes, but you work at CERN. I said, yes, but mais vous êtes African, but you're African. There was that silent clearing of throats, and that freeze out. So what I'm talking about here is that being in a space all the time where one, is an outsider in an area that is largely dominated by Europeans, and physics in particular, and particle physics and mathematical sciences have largely been very male-dominated, white male-dominated, and the concentration is largely in Western Europe, parts of Russia, Japan, and Western Europe. So there's a huge knowledge inequality, and I think that set my journey, that I have to do something about it. And I came back to establish what is arguably basically the program that grew at a rapid speed. That, I would say, did change the face of physics in this country. Now the group has grown. My successor in Itemba Labs, where I was, is Ntlebu Telezi, who actually is an associate professor here at Wits and has taken the group to the next level. She actually now is taking lead positions in many high-level committees at CERN, arguably one of the most prestigious scientific projects in the world. And there we have a black South African woman who is now leading the project that I started in Geneva. So that's an example of your lived experience, how it translates into creating a path for others to follow, because one is to pioneer, one is to take the bullets, put a heat shield on, and punch through.
Professor Phakeng talks about how people have been put in positions but without the necessary or requisite support system. What has been your lived experience in that regard, as now the head of a higher education institution?
I think I agree with Kheti that just appointing a person is not the solution, right? I mean, this is a process. Like transformation is not a single point in space, it's a journey that meanders and weaves and goes along. So in a way, when you make appointments, you got to ensure, I'm not talking about administrative appointments here, I'm talking about academic appointments, that the appropriate mentoring, support, startup grants, networking is very, very important. I think the differentiator between Scholar A and the Scholar B is the amount of networking, the networks that they can tap into that will help them reach their full potential in science. So it's about many factors that include mentoring, support, institutional culture that actually values you. And I think Khet is right. We have to go through that journey and learn. And then before starts, but you need to pick ourselves up and move along. And actually support systems that actually build resilience. The world of, this is a very cold world, and we need to actually ensure that we give our next generation of scholars, in particular those that are women and come from communities that have not had a history in the space, or at least recent history, to have those antibodies to withstand the toxicity that they will come across.
Professor Phakeng, I mean, is the practice still rife of black people generally, but women in particular, being put in positions just to prove, and of course withdrawing, or not providing the kinds of institutional and other forms of support that they need to be able to function optimally in those positions, simply to prove that they can't, and then people revert to status quo. In other words, the appointments weren't made out of genuinely You know, it was, we will show you. But in the meantime, no, someone know. How rife is that phenomenon? Because that used to be the complaint many years ago when more black academics and women academics were put into these positions.
Okay, so let me start by saying, by the way, it is not true that women, when they get appointed into these positions, what support that they need is mentoring. Actually, many of us women, to get to these positions, we've got to be doubly qualified. I don't need to be a rated scientist to get a job of being vice chancellor, but I've got a B1 rating as a scientist. And I can tell you, it never gets mentioned actually, because in fact the men don't have it. Okay, so it's not, but I had to get it because I knew that it can be used against me not to have it, right? And many women do that. They get everything that's needed and more to get the job that a man can get with the normal qualifications, right, and experience. So support doesn't mean mentoring. And it doesn't mean you pathologize the women. It means you actually, first of all, recognize that they are not men, so don't expect them to be men. Secondly, do not change policies simply because they're here. And suddenly you want to change policies. Do not make things that were not an issue when the man was there. Okay, so you have a man who's vice chancellor. People resign, people move on to the next positions, next institutions. It's okay, that's what happens in these places. And executive leadership is not easy. Not everybody will stand it. Some people feel the heat in the kitchen, they get out because it's tough. When a woman is vice chancellor, they want you to make the vice chancellor the problem. No. But in fact, when the vice chancellor is a man, we've had vice chancellor, at least one vice chancellor in this country, who actually in their farewell, the colleagues were saying the one thing they remember about them was that they were saying, heads are going to roll, we're going to fire them, we're going to get them. He could talk freely about firing people. A woman can never do that. Because then if they do that, they are the problem. Okay, so, and I'm talking about executive leadership in this space. All right, so I don't want it to be like the woman needs mentoring, they need coaching. This is, again, a problem of this environment where suddenly you make the woman the problem. Why? Because they are demanding the same treatment. They are demanding that you give them the space to lead, to make these decisions, not to dilly-dally and not saying anything, but make a decision and stand by it. And I'm saying what we need is that, can you pay the women the salaries that are consistent, that at the same level as men? Can you treat the policies the way that you have treated them when the man was in power, was in the office? Can you do that? Just as a start. And then, when a woman leader, vice chancellor, CEO, wants to change their leadership and says, the leadership that I have here is not helping me get the vision through, don't make it an issue. If you didn't make it an issue when the man was busy hiring the people that they can work with, it is important that we do that. And for me, that's the first level of support. You cannot have a woman CEO or vice chancellor or executive director and not want to give them the same recognition and the same powers that the man had, even when their CV is superior. Can I tell you that in this country, we have never had a woman vice chancellor without a PhD, but we have had men vice chancellors without a PhD, and it is okay. And nobody raises a thing, nobody makes a meal out of it. So it's that kind of thing that I'm talking about. It's not that women need mentoring, need hand-holding, they can't do this, they whatever. No. It's recognize them. Because actually, often, they're better than you. Recognize them.
Okay, in the 1.5 minutes or so that we still have left, we cannot end this conversation without talking about student issues, issues of inclusion, financial or otherwise, what the state of affairs is now. Professor Vilakazi.
Yes, I mean, 4 years ago, or was this 5 years ago now, we went through a very difficult period where there was a massive reactions on campus. And they forced us to recalibrate and rethink in various aspects of how do we create an institutional culture that is inclusive of students of all backgrounds, right? Because when the institutions were constructed, not only here and abroad as well, hundreds of years ago, so they spoke to a particular demographic, largely white male, because even in some of the Oxford colleges, women are not allowed. So therefore, that meant that we needed to, as part of this process of transformation that we started post-1994, to relook not just about numbers, access, but about how does the institutional culture of university work itself in a way that creates an environment for all students of all backgrounds, religions and racial backgrounds and gender backgrounds to be part and feel that they own the space and they're part of the space. And that's a process that all of us have embarked in. And I think I've made it central as in my vice chancellorship of this university to in making sure that when we appoint the next deputy vice chancellor in charge of that portfolio, that it will be primarily their responsibility.
Is the problem getting better?
It's a work in progress. We'll get there. If I say worse and I appear nihilistic, I think every journey has got its ups and downs. You don't just go up a mountain, vertically upwards. You go through several upslopes and downslopes. But actually the path is certainly, and it has to be in the right direction.
Let me thank both of you for your time and your insights, and once again, congratulations on these achievements. You've really done all of us proud. Professor Vilakazi, Professor Pakeng, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's our show for tonight. To join us again tomorrow night, same time. Good night.